As you saw in one of our previous videos, in Unreal Engine's starter content folder, there's a material library that we can draw from to use in our project so that we can make something look like moss or steel or cobblestone or achieve other kinds of results. And it's interesting to open up one of these materials that comes with the starter content. It's actually very surprising. If you roll back the middle mouse button, you'll see that setting up this material is actually very complicated. They've got all these different nodes that work together to give the output that we see. And trying to go in to modify one of these materials to get it to do something different if you're just getting started would be really overwhelming. I'm going to show you just how to create a simple material of your own so that you can start to get a grasp of how the material editor works. And one of the first things that we should take a look at here is the texture window. So the material actually, if we go back to the material editor for cobblestone, you'll see, here we go. We have these different texture nodes that are being plugged in and used together to give this appearance. So this is a color map, and this is a normal map. So the color map is like a regular photograph that's being wrapped around the 3D form. And the normal map is also being wrapped around, but it instead of just giving the kind of coloration on the surface, it's giving the simulation of the object actually having deformations in space. So if we go back to the texture folder here, we have a very different library than we see in the material one. It's all just a bunch of pictures, basically, that are being put on the object. Notice that we have different suffixes after the names. So anything that ends with M, anything that ends with D is a diffuse map that's used for coloration. Anything that ends with N, however, is a normal map. So let's take a look at how we can create a basic material. So let's go to our My Stuff folder, and I'll right-click in the empty space here, and then let's, under Create Basic Asset, let's click on Material, and we'll call this Simple Material, and let's open this up. And first, let's give this, you see if we left-click and drag up in the top left corner, we can move this sphere around to look at it from different angles. Let's give this material a different color. So I'll hold down the 3 button on the keyboard and left-click, and that gives us a 3 vector node, which is basically just a means of giving this a color, a single color. So this is not a photograph being wrapped around the object. Instead, it's just any color that is based on this 3 vector input. So we just changed it from black to gray. And now to change the roughness of the object, you can see it's very shiny right now. Let's hold down the 1 button on the keyboard and left-click. And this gives us just a constant parameter. By default, this value is set to 0. Let's plug this in to roughness, and you'll see that it makes it shinier. Setting the roughness to 0 means that we don't want it to be rough at all. We want it to be as shiny as possible. If we set this instead to 1, you'll see that it gets dull on the surface. Okay, and now let's go ahead and put a normal map onto our texture. So we'll hold down the T key on the keyboard and left-click, and that gives us a texture sample node. And if we left-click and drag from the RGB node onto normal, you see it's giving us an error here because we haven't yet given it a texture to work with. So if we come down to the lower left and click on this button, I'm going to type in tile, and let's go to tile patine _n. So we need to make sure to grab a normal map in order to get this to display correctly. Again, a normal map will have a kind of bluish appearance, and the file will probably have the suffix of _n. Okay, and so we can see if we orbit around that we're starting to get some deformation from that normal map. And if we go let's save this, and let's go back out to our motion controller map once it finishes. And let's drag our simple material onto the sphere. And now let's suppose that we want this to actually be like the texture for a wall inside of a house. This size of the bump here would be way too large to give that kind of orange peel texture. And so we can change the tiling by going back into the texture, or back into the material rather, and we just need to give a tiling coordinate change to the texture sample. So let's right click and type in coordinate, texture coordinate, and then we need to multiply this texture coordinate. So let's hold down the M key on the keyboard and left click. That gives us a multiply node. And then we need one more thing. We need a constant parameter, so we'll hold down the 1 key and click. And so what we need to do is then plug texture into A, the texture coordinate. We'll plug in the constant scalar there, and we'll plug multiply, the output node, into UVs. And so with this set to 0, you see that now we have no texture deformation happening. We need to set this to 1 to get back to where we started. Okay, and if we're trying to get this to show up as a finer texture, we need to set a higher number here. So let's set this to 5 and save it. And then if we go back out to the motion controller map, we see that we have indeed scaled that down.